My son called me from the hospital parking lot, not from inside, not sitting next to my bed, but from the parking lot like he couldn't wait to get away. "Mom," he said, "I need to talk to you about the house." I was still in the rehab wing at that point. 4 weeks out of the ICU, learning to hold a fork again with my left hand because my right side hadn't fully come back yet. My speech was slow, my thoughts were slower, but I heard every single word he said. I just didn't understand yet what those words meant. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing who I am and what that house means. My name is June. June Evelyn Hartwell. I turned 67 last March, and I celebrated alone in a hospital room with a small piece of cake a nurse named Rosa brought me because she'd overheard me tell my physical therapist that my birthday was coming up. Rosa was a stranger. My son did not call, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. I was a school librarian for 31 years. Glenwood Elementary in Dayton, Ohio. I shelved books, read to kindergartners, helped fourth graders find their first chapter books. It was never a job that made anyone rich, but I was careful with money in the way that only someone who grew up without much of it learns to be. I packed my lunch every day. I drove the same car for 12 years. I bought generic cereal and name-brand shoes because shoes matter when you're on your feet all day, and in everything else, I cut corners without shame. My husband Robert died of a heart attack when our son was 11 years old. We'd been married 16 years. He was 44. I was 38, and suddenly I was standing at a graveside with a boy who didn't fully understand what death meant yet, and a mortgage I wasn't sure I could carry alone, but I did carry it. Every month, for 26 more years, I carried it. And then, one spring, I wrote the last check, mailed it to the bank, and I sat down at my kitchen table and cried, the kind of tears that don't have a name. Relief isn't the right word. Pride isn't either. It was something closer to, I did this. Against everything, I did this. The house on Clover Mill Road was mine. 3 bedrooms, a screened-in back porch, a maple tree in the front yard that turned the color of fire every October. It wasn't big. It wasn't fancy, but it was the house where my son took his first steps, where we put his height marks on the doorframe of the kitchen, where I made Thanksgiving dinner every year, even when it was just the two of us at the table. My son's name is Scott. He was a good boy. I need to say that because people hear a story like this and they assume someone was always rotten, that the ending was predictable from the beginning. Scott wasn't rotten. He was sweet, actually. Quiet. A little lost after his father died, the way boys sometimes go quiet when the thing they needed most disappears before they had the words to ask for it. I did my best. You always do your best and wonder afterward if your best was good enough. He grew up. He moved to Columbus for work, which was only an hour and a half away, and at first he came home most Sundays. Then it was every other Sunday. Then the Sundays became holidays, and the holidays became Christmas. And then even Christmas got complicated because of her. Her name is Whitney. She came from money in the way that some people wear money, quietly, but you feel it. Her parents had a 5-bedroom house in a suburb of Cincinnati, a boat they kept at a marina on Lake Erie, opinions about everything. I tried with Whitney. I genuinely tried. I asked about her work. I remembered her birthday. I once drove 90 minutes to attend a gallery opening she had organized because she was a coordinator for a nonprofit arts group, and I stood there for 2 hours holding a glass of sparkling water, knowing no one, just because I wanted her to know I cared. She was polite to me the way you're polite to someone you don't actually like but are obligated to tolerate. Scott and Whitney got married 4 years ago, small wedding which I supported. I wore the nicest dress I owned, and I did not cry during the ceremony even though I wanted to, because the tears would have been complicated, happy and sad and worried all at once, and I didn't want to explain all of that in the receiving line. After the wedding, the distance between Scott and me grew in ways I didn't know how to name. Phone calls got shorter. When I visited Columbus, I slept in a guest room that felt like it had been staged for a hotel. Nothing personal anywhere, just a gray duvet and a diffuser that smelled like eucalyptus. I told myself this was normal, that all mothers go through this, that I should be grateful my son had a good life and a wife and a home of his own. I told myself a lot of things. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in February. I was making oatmeal. I remember the burner clicking on, and I remember reaching for the wooden spoon on the counter, and then I remember nothing. I woke up in the emergency room at Miami Valley Hospital with a nurse speaking to me very slowly and carefully, the way people speak when they aren't sure how much you understand. It was a significant stroke, they told me. The right side of my body was affected. My speech was affected. I would need inpatient rehab, then outpatient therapy for months, possibly longer. Scott arrived that evening. He sat by my bed for about 2 hours. He held my hand. He cried a little. I couldn't say much because the words weren't coming out right yet. They were in my head, but the pathway out was broken. And so I just squeezed his fingers and looked at his face and thought, he's here. He came. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that he had also, sometime in the past year, had me sign a general durable power of attorney during what he framed as an estate planning visit. He'd driven down from Columbus one Saturday, taken me to lunch at a place I liked, and then said he'd made an appointment with an attorney friend of his to do some basic estate planning, Mom, just practical stuff, nothing morbid. I had signed several documents that afternoon. I trusted him. He was my son. A durable power of attorney doesn't end when someone becomes incapacitated. That's the whole point of it. And Scott had one with my signature on it. I did not know this would matter for 4 months. And then it did. The transfer happened in April. I was still in the rehab facility, working on getting my right hand to do what I told it to, practicing words with a speech therapist named Carla, who had the patience of someone who had seen everything. I was not ready to go home. I was not ready for much of anything. What I did not know was that Scott had filed a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of the house on Clover Mill Road to Whitney's parents. The transfer price on the deed was $1. $1. The house I paid for with 31 years of librarian salary and 12 years of packed lunches and a decade of driving a car, held together by routine maintenance and stubbornness. Transferred for $1 to a couple who owned a boat and a 5-bedroom house in Cincinnati. I found out from my neighbor, a woman named Carol, who had lived across the street from me for 22 years. Carol noticed the locksmith's truck in my driveway. She noticed unfamiliar people going in and out with boxes. She wasn't the kind of person to gossip, but she was the kind of person who paid attention, and she drove to the rehab facility to see me that same week. She sat across from me in the visitor's lounge and she said, very carefully, "June, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to say it." I told her to just say it. She did. I sat there for a long moment after she finished. The speech problems made it hard to respond quickly even when I had something to say, and in that moment I had nothing to say because my mind had simply gone quiet the way a room goes quiet after something breaks. Then I asked her to hand me the phone from my nightstand. I called Scott. He didn't answer. I called again. He picked up on the third call. "Mom." His voice was careful, rehearsed. I recognized it because I had heard that voice before when he was 16 and had dented the car and was trying to decide how much to tell me. "Did you transfer my house?" I said. The words came out slower than I wanted them to. My speech was still healing, but they came out. Silence. "We need to talk about that," he said. "Whitney's parents needed, their situation changed. The Columbus market, Mom, we thought. Did you transfer my house?" I said again. Another silence. "Yes." I hung up. I want to tell you what that moment felt like, but I'm not sure I have the right words even now. It wasn't rage, not yet. Rage came later. What I felt first was something colder. It was the feeling of a door closing on a version of your life that you didn't know you were about to lose. The house on Clover Mill Road was where Robert and I had argued about money when we were young and scared, and didn't know how to say we were scared. It was where Scott had nightmares as a child and climbed into my bed at 3 in the morning. It was where I had eaten breakfast alone for 2.5 decades without anyone to talk to, and had made peace with that, slowly in the way you make peace with the shape of your life. And my son had signed it over for $1 while I was learning to hold a fork again. The cold feeling stayed for about 3 days, and then it became something else. I called a legal aid office that Carol found for me, one that specifically helped seniors with financial exploitation cases. The attorney there, a young woman who spoke to me without any of the condescension I'd half expected, explained what had happened and what the options were. She used the phrase elder financial abuse. I'd heard that term before in the abstract, the way you hear about things that happen to other people. I had never thought of it as something with my name on it. In Ohio, a quitclaim deed transfer that appears to be the result of undue influence or exploitation of an incapacitated person can be challenged in court. The $1 transfer price was not a good look. The fact that I was actively incapacitated and in a rehabilitation facility at the time of the transfer was significant. The fact that Scott had framed the power of attorney as routine estate planning without fully explaining its scope was something that could be argued. The attorney was honest with me. It wasn't guaranteed. It would take time. It would be hard. I said I understood. She filed the challenge that month. What happened next was the part I hadn't fully prepared for, which was Scott calling me. He called 2 days after the papers were filed. He wasn't careful or rehearsed this time. He was angry. "I cannot believe you're doing this," he said. "Whitney's parents are already moved in. They sold their house in Cincinnati. Where are they supposed to go?" I let him finish. Then I said, slowly but clearly, because my speech had improved considerably by then, "Where was I supposed to go, Scott?" Silence. "I was in a hospital bed," I said. "You used my signature to take my home. You don't understand the situation." "I understand exactly the situation," I said. "You thought I wasn't coming back. And when I came back, it was an inconvenience." He didn't have an answer for that. People rarely do when the truth is sitting plainly in the room. There's something no one tells you about recovering from a stroke, which is that the recovery happens at the same time as the rest of your life. I was relearning how to button a shirt in the mornings and also learning what my son had done. I was doing exercises to rebuild the strength in my right hand and also meeting with attorneys and signing documents and trying to understand words like undue influence and fiduciary duty. The physical and the emotional were tangled up together in a way that some days made it hard to know which. One was harder. Carol let me stay with her while the legal process worked through the courts. She made coffee every morning and never asked me how I was feeling more than once, which was exactly the right amount. Her guest room had a window that looked out on a bird feeder, and I spent a lot of early mornings sitting in the chair by that window watching chickadees. I thought about Robert a lot during those months. I thought about what he would have said, what he would have done. Robert was a gentleman, but he had a line, and when you crossed it, he became very quiet and very certain. And that certainty was more frightening than anger would have been. I like to think I was the same. I was not always the same. There were nights in Carol's guest room when I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Robert's funeral. Not pretty crying. Ugly, exhausted. What was the point crying? 31 years. Every Friday the paycheck came and a portion of it went to that house. And the maple tree in October. And the height marks on the kitchen door frame, Scott's name and the year next to each one, the last one from when he was 17 and had finally outgrown me. Those marks were still on that doorframe. In a house where I no longer legally lived, that made me angrier than anything else. More than the attorneys or the legal filings or the conversations with Scott. The height marks. They were mine. That wall was mine. And I intended to get it back. The court ruled in my favor 11 months after the challenge was filed. The judge found that the transfer had occurred while I was demonstrably incapacitated, that the $1 consideration was not consistent with a legitimate arm's-length transaction, and that there was sufficient evidence of undue influence to void the deed. Whitney's parents had to vacate the property. I was told this by my attorney on a Thursday afternoon in a phone call I took sitting in Carol's kitchen. I said, "Thank you," hung up, and sat very still for a minute. Then I called Carol into the room and told her, and she hugged me and I let myself cry again. But these were different tears. These had the thing underneath them that I hadn't felt in almost a year. I felt it again driving back to Clover Mill Road for the first time. The maple tree had gone through an entire cycle without me. It had been February when I left, and now it was January again, the tree bare and angular against a gray Ohio sky. The locksmith Scott had hired had changed the locks, so my key no longer worked. My attorney had arranged for the original locks to be restored before the handover, and the new key was in an envelope in my coat pocket. I stood on my own front porch and put the key in the lock and turned it. The house smelled different. Someone else's candles, someone else's cooking, the particular smell of strangers having lived in a space. The furniture was different. Most of mine had been moved into the garage, apparently, because there wasn't room for it once the in-laws brought their own things. Some of my things were not in the garage. Some of my things I have not found. I walked through every room, slowly, because I still walked a little slowly on the right side. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter. I stood in the doorway of what had been Scott's room as a child, then a sewing room, then a guest room, now stripped to bare walls. I went to the kitchen door frame. The height marks were still there. Someone had painted over the door frame, a different shade of white, slightly off from the original, but they hadn't sanded it first, and if you looked closely you could see the faint ridges where the pencil lines had been, where the tape measure had been held against a small boy's head, where I had written his name in my handwriting with the years beside it. I pressed my palm flat against that door frame. I didn't say anything out loud, but I said something, somewhere, to someone. I stayed. Scott and I have not spoken since the court ruling. I have thought about what I would say if he called. Some days I think I would say nothing. Some days I have whole conversations in my head that are full of things I would want him to understand. About what it cost me to raise him alone, about what the house meant, about what trust means when you hand it to someone and they treat it carelessly. But he hasn't called. And I find, as the months go by, that I am less focused on that conversation and more focused on other things. My speech is nearly back to where it was. My right hand is not quite what it was, but it is functional. And last month, I was able to make pie crust from scratch for the first time since the stroke, which felt like a victory that belonged entirely to me. Carol comes for dinner on Thursdays. I started a small garden in the backyard this spring. Tomatoes, basil, one experimental row of green beans that is not going well, but that I refuse to give up on. The maple tree turned in October. I watched it from the screened-in back porch with a cup of coffee, and I thought about all the Octobers it had turned while I was inside, busy, not watching. I watched this one. There is a woman in my stroke support group named Betty who lost most of her savings in a scam 2 years ago. There is a man named Howard who is fighting his own children over a piece of property in Pennsylvania. We sit in a circle on Tuesday mornings in a church fellowship hall and we tell each other the true things, the ones that are hard to say anywhere else. I told them my story once, all of it, the oatmeal on the burner, the parking lot phone call, the $1 deed, the height marks on the door frame. When I finished, Betty reached over and put her hand on mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I have learned, at 67, that the people who show up are more precious than you understand until they do. Carol across the street for 22 years, noticing a locksmith truck. Rosa the nurse who remembered my birthday. Betty, who knows without being told what it means to have something taken. I have learned that a house is and is not the point. The point is what the house represents. The proof that you were here, that you worked, that you endured, that you made something out of the materials you were given. I fought for the house because I needed to prove that it couldn't just be taken from me in the night while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. I needed to prove that I still had a self that could be wronged and could respond. I proved it, and every morning I come downstairs in my own house, on my own street, under my own maple tree, and I make my oatmeal, carefully now, more carefully than before. And I stand at the stove and I think, I am still here. I am still here. I am still here. And that is enough. I have been thinking a lot lately about what causes things. Not in a cosmic sense. I'm not a person who needs the universe to have a plan, but in the plain, practical sense of actions lead somewhere. Every single one of them. Scott didn't wake up one morning and decide to become the kind of son who signs away his mother's house while she's relearning how to button her shirt. That's not how it works. It happened the way most quiet disasters happen, in small steps, each one feeling reasonable enough in the moment. A little distance here. A little more of Whitney's voice in his ear there, a signature on a document he framed as routine. And then, when the crisis came, he made the choice that all those small steps had prepared him to make. He chose the path of least resistance, which happened to run straight through everything I had built. That's what I mean by cause and effect, not punishment from somewhere above. Just the simple, unforgiving truth that who you are in the small moments is exactly who you will be in the large ones. Scott had been practicing for years, without knowing it, how to choose comfort over conscience. And so when the moment came, he was ready. Just not in the way he should have been. I think about my own choices, too. I signed a document I didn't fully read because I trusted the person handing me the pen. That was my part in it. I don't say that to blame myself. What Scott did was wrong, full stop, and a mother should be able to trust her son. But I learned something hard and useful from it. Trust is not the same as abdication. You can love someone and still read the fine print. You can believe in a person and still ask questions. Intelligence isn't cold, it's protective. I wish someone had told me that when I was younger, but I know it now and I will not forget it. What carried me through the 11 months of legal filings and rehab exercises and mornings in Carol's guest room watching birds was not anger, though there was anger. It was something quieter. It was the refusal to accept that the story was over just because someone else had decided it was. That refusal. That's what I want to call moral courage, though the phrase sounds grander than the feeling. The feeling is more like no. Just no. Plainly, stubbornly, with no audience and no applause. No. Carol showed me something too, without meaning to. She was just a neighbor. She had no obligation to drive to that rehab facility and sit across from me in the visitor's lounge and tell me the truth. But she did it because it was right, and because she was the kind of person who had spent 22 years being quietly decent. And decency, it turns out, is also a practice. You build it the same way you build anything, one ordinary day at a time. I walked back into my house on Clover Mill Road with a new key in my coat pocket and my right hand still not quite what it was. The maple tree was bare. The house smelled like strangers. Some of my things were gone, and I have not found them. And I stood in the kitchen doorway and pressed my palm against those height marks. Scott's name, the years, the faint ridges under paint that didn't know what it was trying to cover, and I thought, this is what endurance actually looks like. Not dramatic, not triumphant. Just a woman standing in her own kitchen, still standing. That's the whole lesson, if there is one. Stay honest, stay sharp, and don't stop standing.